If you're in the market for a new Tesla Model 3 in the USA, you have three choices. You can purchase a long-range rear-wheel drive, long-range all-wheel drive, or performance variant. But beyond the obvious powertrain differences, what do you gain with the more expensive trims, and are they worth the extra cost? If you're curious for that answer, stick around because you're in the right place. I'm John, and this is Cleanerwatt. First off, I want to clear up a common misconception I have seen in my comment section for previous videos. In the USA, the long-range rear-wheel drive and the long-range all-wheel drive version of the Model 3, as far as I know, use the same battery. Both vehicles feature battery packs made with Panasonic 2170 NCA battery cells that are manufactured at Gigafactory, Nevada. In addition, as far as I know, the performance variant of the Model 3 also uses that same battery pack, because unlike the Model Y, where Tesla makes clear that that vehicle, the performance variant of that vehicle, has an upgraded battery pack, it appears like with the Model 3, it's the same battery pack found in the long-range all-wheel drive and the long-range rear-wheel drive variant of the vehicle. I could be wrong on that, but as far as I can tell, that's the case. With that being said, there is a pretty significant cost difference between these versions of the Model 3. For example, if you go from the long-range rear-wheel drive to the long-range all-wheel drive version, that's going to cost you $5,000 more. And if you move from the long-range all-wheel drive version to the performance version of the vehicle, that's going to cost you an additional $7,500, meaning that there's a $12,500 gap between the long-range rear-wheel drive and the performance version of the Model 3. That's a significant amount of money, but is it worth it? With that being said, I do want to make a special side note here that for those who take delivery of a Model 3 by September 30th of 2025, if you qualify, you will be eligible for a $7,500 point of sale tax credit. However, since that's about to expire at the end of this month, I didn't take that into my calculations. But if you're looking to purchase a Model 3 in the short term, you want to keep that in mind. I do want to address one of the most obvious differences between these vehicles, and that's the powertrain difference. The rear-wheel drive version of the vehicle obviously has a single motor on the rear axle, whereas the all-wheel drive, the long-range all-wheel drive, and the performance versions of the vehicle have two motors, one in the front, one in the back. Those vehicles are going to have superior traction, those all-wheel drive vehicles, superior traction in winter weather especially. But if you live in a very mild climate and you don't get a lot of winter weather, the rear-wheel drive version is going to give you more range. And even if you do get some snow, the rear-wheel drive versions of Tesla's vehicles, as I've talked about in past videos, actually, when equipped with winter tires, do quite well. Tesla's traction control system, even with a rear-wheel drive version, is very impressive. Of course, the rear-wheel drive version of the vehicle, once again, with a single motor, is going to be more efficient than the versions of the Tesla Model 3 with two motors, the long-range all-wheel drive and the performance all-wheel drive. So when it comes to the EPA rated range of that rear-wheel drive version with 18-inch wheels, it's estimated to get 357 miles of range on a single charge. Whereas with the long-range all-wheel drive version, that EPA range is 11 miles less. And when it comes to the performance Model 3, the range drop is quite drastic, all the way down to 298 miles, which is still a decent amount of range, but as compared to the other variants of the Model 3, quite a drop. Now, more important than that are real-world range tests. And I don't have range tests for everything here, but I did some research and I found that Car and Driver did a test for the long-range rear-wheel drive Highland Model 3 with 18-inch wheels. And in their test, they say that driving 75 miles per hour, the real-world range is 310 miles. That's pretty respectable when you factor in that the EPA rating is for a mix of city and highway driving. So driving 75 miles per hour on the highway, you should still be able to expect over 300 miles of range with the rear-wheel drive, the long-range rear-wheel drive Model 3. However, with that same Car and Driver data, at 75 miles per hour, you can only expect around 260 miles of range with the performance. So that's a drastic 50-mile difference between those two versions. In addition, I went to evdatabase.org, and while these estimates are for the European version of these vehicles, which are equipped, I believe, with LG battery cells as compared to the US versions, which have Panasonic battery cells, so there might be a slight difference in battery capacity. These are a good number to look at as well. And the EV database listed real range for the long-range rear-wheel drive Model 3 is 340 miles, and the all-wheel drive version, 325 miles. So if you're looking for a vehicle to maximize range and do best for road trips, things like that, the rear-wheel drive version is amazing for that. However, if you have pretty extreme winters where you live, there's really not a huge drop between the rear-wheel drive and the all-wheel drive version of the Model 3 there. Once again, an EPA-rated difference of 11 miles and a 15-mile difference according to the EV database real range. Now, when it comes to a ratio of range versus cost, I want to discuss the cost per mile of range differences between these vehicles. Obviously, that rear-wheel drive version being the lowest cost and the highest EPA-rated range version of the vehicle has a very low $123.61 per mile of range. That's low. It's a little bit higher with a long-range all-wheel drive version with 18-inch wheels at $141.99, and it goes all the way up to $190.03 per mile of range with a performance version of the vehicle. So if you're looking for the best bang for your buck and you don't need the all-wheel drive powertrain, that rear-wheel drive version is quite a bargain. Okay, one of the most important categories to discuss here when we talk about the differences between these vehicles are feature differences. Are there any major feature differences between these three variants? There are some special upgrades that I'm going to discuss for the Performance Model 3. And so I'm going to discuss those separately. But when it comes to the base features that you get with each version of the Model 3, there's really only one big difference that I could find, and that's the sound system. Tesla's vehicles do come pretty fully equipped as is, and you can see that Tesla on their website lists a number of features included with all Model 3 trims. However, when you do a side-by-side comparison of the basic features, they all have basic autopilot, heated steering, heated seats, ventilated front seats, vegan leather seats, infotainment screens front and back, 360-degree acoustic glass, a hands-free trunk, and ambient lighting. However, when it comes to the sound system between these versions, the long-range all-wheel drive and the performance versions have the 15-speaker, one subwoofer sound system, whereas with the long-range rear-wheel drive version of the vehicle, you only get a 7-speaker sound system, and it doesn't look like it has a subwoofer. When it comes to the exterior of these vehicles, the rear-wheel drive and the all-wheel drive version look exactly the same. However, when you move to the performance version of the vehicle, there are some design differences that Tesla made. One of the first differences is the front fascia and the front bumper area. You can see that that front fascia lip is different for the Performance Model 3 and that there's an additional cutout there on the front bumper area. I believe that cutout allows air to flow through that into the wheel well, and you can see those changes a little bit better with this front view. In addition, the Performance Model 3 has exclusive forged performance wheels and high-performance brakes with red brake calipers, whereas you don't get that with a non-performance version. Tesla also added a carbon fiber spoiler lip to the Performance Model 3, and you can see a little bit of a difference there of how far it sticks out versus a non-performance version. In addition, when you look at the rear diffuser design, it is shaped a little bit different with the performance version versus a non-performance version. So overall, while these changes aren't drastic, I believe they are good improvements, not only to the aesthetics of the vehicle, but on Tesla's website, they state that, quote, front and rear fascias, a rear diffuser, and carbon fiber spoiler give a unique look and work together to optimize high-speed stability. So when it comes to a track setting where you're driving at higher speeds, these design differences should make a difference. There's also a couple major differences in the interior of the Performance Model 3 versus the long-range all-wheel drive and long-range rear-wheel drive versions. And that first main difference is the exclusive sports seats found in the Performance version. These sports seats have a lot more bolstering on the side and extended thigh supports, and feature the performance badging built into the back of the seat. In addition to that, Tesla has added carbon fiber details to the interior of the Performance Model 3. Now, beyond the interior and exterior differences, the suspension system for the Performance Model 3 is also improved, and Tesla describes this as, quote, adaptive damping powered by in-house software gives you enhanced body control without sacrificing daily usability or comfort. While both the long-range all-wheel drive and the Performance Model 3 both feature dual motors, the motors on the Performance version of the vehicle are upgraded. Tesla describes these new motors as, quote, "Our latest generation performance drive unit, Performance 4DU, unlocks more torque, power, and better efficiency. Compared to the previous Model 3 performance drive unit, the Performance 4DU can deliver up to plus 22% continuous power, plus 32% peak power, and plus 16% peak torque delivery. Behind the wheel, drivers will sense more immediate and sustained acceleration out of corners. That's the beauty of more torque." With these performance motors, Tesla states that this powertrain delivers more than 500 horsepower, and obviously this vehicle is much quicker than Tesla's other Model 3 variants. So when it comes to the acceleration differences between these vehicles, Tesla lists the 0 to 60 mile per hour time for the long-range rear-wheel drive version at 4.9 seconds, the long-range all-wheel drive at 4.2 seconds, and the performance version under 3 seconds at 2.9 seconds. That's extremely quick. In addition, when it comes to top speed, the long-range rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive both have the same 125 mile per hour top speed. However, that increases to 163 miles per hour with the performance version. In addition, according to data that I found in a Tesla RWD article, the Tesla Model 3 Performance can complete a quarter mile in under 11 seconds. Another really important comparison to discuss is charging speed. Now, as far as I know, each one of these variants of the Model 3 have the same battery pack. They all have Panasonic 2170 battery cells in their battery packs as far as I can tell. So the charging speed from 10% to 80%, for example, should be pretty much the same. However, the difference comes into play when you factor in efficiency and how many miles of range you're actually adding per minute of charging. On Tesla's website, for example, they list that if you supercharge each of these vehicles for 15 minutes, with a long-range rear-wheel drive version, you can add up to 195 miles of range, with a long-range all-wheel drive version, 185 miles, and with a performance version, 142 miles. So there is quite a difference there when it comes to miles being added in that 15-minute span. But beyond that, when it comes to the charging speed for a 10% to 80% charge, I pulled data from evdatabase.org, and while this is for a European version of the Model 3, the long-range rear-wheel drive version, which I believe has LG batteries as compared to the Panasonic batteries in the US versions of the vehicle, I believe these numbers are close enough for comparison to use here. And they estimate that when connected to a 250 kilowatt charger, that you should be able to go from a 10% to 80% state of charge with a long-range Model 3 battery pack in 27 minutes, or when connected to a 150 kilowatt charger, 33 minutes. So when it comes to miles being added per minute of charging, you can see that the long-range rear-wheel drive beats out the rest of the vehicles due to its efficiency. So with all that in mind, is it worth the extra cost to upgrade to the higher trim levels of the Model 3? Well, in my opinion, if you live in a climate that does not get a lot of extreme winter weather, I would personally save the $5,000 and go with a rear-wheel drive version of the vehicle, mainly because it's more efficient and has the same basic features minus the premium sound system. However, if you do live in an area with harsher winters, it's definitely worth the extra $5,000 to get that all-wheel drive powertrain and the improved sound system. And once again, the EPA range difference is not that drastic between these variants. Now, if you're set on an all-wheel drive version of the Model 3, is it worth moving from the long-range all-wheel drive to the performance all-wheel drive version of the Model 3? Well, if it comes to just daily driving and you're not going to do a lot of performance driving on the track, for example, personally speaking, I believe the long-range all-wheel drive version of the vehicle is the way to go. It's still able to go 0 to 60 miles per hour in 4.2 seconds. It saves you $7,500 over the performance version. And with the performance version, you have to keep in mind that in the future, you're going to have more expensive tires to buy. You're more likely to damage the rims because the tires are thinner. And in addition, you have considerably less range with that vehicle versus the other versions of the Model 3. But if you're looking for the vehicle that will be the most fun and one that you can take to the track on the weekends, for example, and have a lot of fun with it, the performance version definitely has enough extra features to justify, in my opinion, the extra $7,500 over the long-range all-wheel drive version. But do let me know what you think about all this in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you. I'd also like to say thank you to all of those of you who support me through Patreon. Your support makes a big difference and does help make these videos possible. If you'd like to find out more about how you can support my work through Patreon, I will put a link in the video description. Thank you so much.